Thank you for joining us for this special Friday virtual event on Arkansas Returns to Learning. I'm Tim Allen, President of the Chamber of Commerce. In August of each year, the Chamber hosts a teacher appreciation breakfast for our area's K-12 educational system with the partnerships of our sponsors, and we had many, far too many to mention from the podium this morning. We do this to express our sincere appreciation to our educators. Although this year we cannot gather in one place, we refuse to let COVID stop us from this tradition. Thanks to so many generous sponsors and volunteers, we delivered breakfast items to 34 schools in this area, serving hundreds of teachers breakfast. Please join me in giving our sponsors and our volunteers a hand for making this week a success. Thank you. Now I would like to introduce Jason Green, VP of HR with ABB and the Education Chair for the Fort Smith Chamber of Commerce, to say a few words and introduce our distinguished speaker. Jason.
Good morning. Thank you, Tim. Today's speaker is Secretary of Education Johnny Key. In May of 2019, Governor Hutchinson announced Key as the Secretary of the Department of Ed as part of his plan to transform state government. Under Secretary Key's leadership, the agency has focused on a number of things, including the vision of transforming Arkansas to lead the nation in student-focused education. Their mission is to provide leadership, support, and service to our schools, our districts, and our many communities so that every student that graduates is prepared for college, career, and community engagement. The value statements and goals of the group guide their daily work within the agency. Prior to being named commissioner, Secretary Key served as Associate Vice President for University Relations at the University of Arkansas System, a position he has held since August of 2014. He began his career in public service in 1997 when he was elected to serve as Justice of the Peace on the Baxter County Quorum Court, and was elected to 3 two-year terms in the House of Representatives, followed by a tenure in the Senate that began in 2008. While in the Senate, he served on a number of committees, including the Senate Education Committee and the Legislative Council for Administrative Rules and Regulations. He graduated from Gurdon High School, Gurdon, Arkansas, and received a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemical Engineering in 1991 from the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. He has received many awards throughout his career, including the 2013 Legislative Pacesetter of the Year Award by the Arkansas Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and the 2012 Distinguished Service Award from Arkansas State University at Jonesboro. He and his wife, Shannon, live in Little Rock and have 2 children, 1 son, Ryan, and 1 daughter, Rachel. Please join me in welcoming Secretary of Education, Johnny Key.
All right, thank you, Jason, and Tim, thank you for the invitation. And thank you, Dr. Riley. As I walked in, got out of the vehicle, Dr. Riley was walking by and just so happened to have a very nice UA Fort Smith mask. So I'll model this for a moment and say thank you, Dr. Riley, for that. Also, thank you for your leadership. And we were reminiscing, I think the last visit to Fort Smith was when I came after Dr. Riley first arrived, and she gave me a nice tour of the campus back when we could do things like gather and walk and shake hands and some of those simple social norms that we now have taken for granted, but now have to do different things. But I'm happy to be in Fort Smith, and I'm very happy to be here to talk about the state of education here in Arkansas, and really starting with our vision, because our vision for Arkansas is to transform Arkansas. This isn't transformation of education. It's really about transforming the state so that our state leads the nation in student-focused education. And I know that that is something that is of high value in the Fort Smith area, from pre-K all the way through post-secondary opportunities. And that's how our not just our education system, but that's how our economy, that's how our entire state will continue to thrive. And our mission is to provide leadership support and service to districts, to communities, to schools, so that every student graduates prepared for college, career, and community engagement. It's not or, it's and. Because in our society today, it's not to just say, okay, we're going to get kids graduated from high school and then move on to college, because it's a different environment now. It has to be nimble, has to be robust. We have to provide opportunities for students that find different career paths than what we did just 20, 30 years ago. And community engagement. We want our students in Arkansas, one, to stay in Arkansas. We want our students to find opportunities in Arkansas so they can thrive, so they can start their own business, so they can be successful in a career. And whether that career is one of helping make sure that your heating and air conditioning is working, that is of high value to us. If it's making sure your very complex car or truck is on the road, stays on the road, is very important to us. If it's becoming an artist, if it's becoming a doctor, if it is becoming an engineer, those are all very important to us. We must, in our pre-K through post-secondary education system, create those opportunities for our students. We must do that whether we're in normal times or in a pandemic, and that's what we're working on right now. I go back this diagram to show how we are different now. In the past, if you think about our K-12 education under the old No Child Left Behind system, it was very much a cookie cutter approach. You may have heard your educator friends talk about No Child Left Behind, and they may have some disparaging adjectives to throw along with that. We learned a lot during that time. And we learned, and as it came about in 2015, when the federal government under the Obama administration signed the Every Student Succeeds Act, we were able to move from a very compliance, a very rigid mentality of how we improve our schools to one that is looks at how do we improve schools on an ongoing basis. Using that plan, do, check model that many of our successful organizations, successful businesses use, using that in education to make all of our students' needs are being met. Now let's talk about the COVID-19 pandemic and what we are dealing with now. And I use this phrase that a wise man described a statement, or made a statement that very vividly described where we are now. And that wise man was Mike Tyson, who said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And we had plans back in the spring of 2020. Every district, every college, every person in Arkansas had some type of plan, and COVID-19 punched us all in the mouth. There is no doubt that we, as a nation, were not prepared for the impact that that disease was going to have on us. And we're still trying to recover from that. We're still recovering from that punch in the mouth, but it's something that, as Arkansans always do, pulling together, working together, make things happen so that we learn from what we saw in the spring, and using that information, using what we learned, and then moving forward into the fall to make sure that our adjustments have been made, the changes have been made to our processes and procedures, and rethinking what our reality is now and how that relates to how we serve our students. But first, before I get too deep into this, I want to celebrate. I want to celebrate with Brubaker and his team here at the Fort Smith Public Schools on some great achievements over the last several years now. As we have mentioned the Every Student Succeeds Act, one of the ways that we have found that schools can best implement that plan, do, check, that continuous model of improvement is through the professional learning communities process. Without getting into too much detail on what that means, basically professional learning communities takes research, decades of research from how effective organizations operate, whether it's an effective business or whether it's an effective nonprofit, it doesn't matter. It's not about running schools like a business, it's like operating like an effective organization. So taking that research, there are researchers such as Dr. Rick Dufour, who have applied this research in a school setting and now has provided through a number of authors, through a number of professional development methodologies. We now can take that professional learning community, that effective schools research, and apply it across the state. And Fort Smith has adopted that in a great way and are seeing great success. So Ballman Elementary School, earlier this spring, or in the summer, we recognized them as a model professional learning community school, which is a great achievement. What does that mean? That means, one, they have to have demonstrated not just that they've completed a checklist. So we've done this, this, and this. In education, that's a lot of what we used to do in the past, is we have a checklist of things and we check these boxes. That means, well, that's not really, that doesn't mean we've arrived. That means we've checked off some boxes. What professional learning communities do and what the model schools have shown is, yes, they have done these things, but that also has proven to have impact on students. So student results are a key indicator of whether a school has arrived. Ballman Elementary is definitely one of those schools, along with Spradling Elementary. Spradling on a number of occasions to celebrate with them as they have gone through this process. And again, this summer, they were recognized as a PLC model school, as well as Northside High School. This one was really exciting to me because it kind of snuck up on me, Dr. Brubaker. They caught me by surprise. I did not realize the intensity of the work that was going on at Northside, but I commend all three of these schools. And the leadership of the Fort Smith School District should be commended because they are taking this approach district-wide. We had a program that the legislators and your mayor, I was going to call him Representative George McGill, Mayor George McGill, worked very hard in helping establish this, but a pilot program for professional learning communities in the state of Arkansas. And because of his work previously at Spradling, he said, Johnny, this is what we need. Every school in Arkansas needs this. And he was instrumental in making it happen. So I want to say kudos to your mayor for the work that he has done in being a leader in making this happen in the state. But congratulations to you and your community for the work that's gone into making this happen. And I look forward to coming back and celebrating again in the future as more schools achieve this great status. Also, a couple of years ago, I was here in Fort Smith, and at the time, Governor Hutchinson was going around the state talking about his government transformation plan. This was prior to the 2019 legislative session, and he had outlined some of the goals that he had as we took 60-something cabinet-level agencies and brought them together into 15 cabinet-level agencies. Obviously, cost savings was a very important part of that. Not the only thing, because he always stresses this isn't just about saving money, it's about providing better services to our customers, the taxpayers. Well, I'm proud to come to you today and announce that just in the Department of Education, we have seen considerable success in the time since transformation began on July 1, 2019. In that time, the department has seen over $1.7 million in savings and efficiencies that have been driven directly from work that we've established through transformation. We've also seen some success in alignment through college and career education, working together now under the umbrella of the Department of Education, our ABC program, which is our state-funded preschool program, obviously our K through 12 initiatives, and also our higher ed initiatives, together with career and technical education. We have seen a very smooth transition to working together as a team to make sure that continuum of education is available and that the on-ramps and off-ramps of that continuum of education for our Kansans are easier to overcome, easier to maneuver. People know better now than they did 2 years ago how they can be successful in accessing the educational opportunities in the state of Arkansas. Just wanted to give a brief report on that as we talk about education today. So let's talk about education. Let's talk about where we are in the pandemic. So since March, when I stood there with the governor at his press briefing and made the very difficult decision and announced that very difficult decision to say we are closing schools for on-site instruction for the remainder of the year. I'll tell you, that was hard. That was hard for the governor. That was hard for every educator in the state of Arkansas. We did not know what, at that time, the extent, the level of complications, all of the things that were going on, if you remember back in the spring, of what COVID-19 meant, not just to education, but to the state as a whole. But the governor made it very clear at that time, it is the expectation and has been the expectation that when schools open this fall, we would open for on-site instruction. That was something he wanted for K-12, something he wanted for higher education. And he challenged me and the team of the Department of Education. We need to learn what we can and be able to implement changes to our processes and practices and procedures so that we could successfully open school in the fall. I believe that's what we have done over the last several months. Think about, though, what this has meant to our students. If you just start thinking about your time and on your calendar and how that's changed since the spring, as a professional or as a parent, think about what this has meant to students who one day were very reliant on what the services and the educational opportunities, the meals, all of those things that have become part of what we have created in our society that schools mean to our students. And then March happens, April goes by, May goes by. Obviously, June, July are months that students don't expect to be in school, but because of the impact on their education back in March, April, and May, the summer has been a little tougher on them. I will say this, we saw a tremendous effort. We have amazing educators in the state of Arkansas, and despite the closure to on-site instruction, we saw an amazing effort by our educators of moving to what we called then AMI, Alternative Methods of Instruction. And we were successful, relatively successful, especially when compared to other states. There were states that had to shut down for multiple weeks, 2, sometimes 3 weeks, in order to prepare to shift to online instruction or some type of at-home instruction. Because since 2017, our legislature then passed the alternative methods of instruction, we've had a few years of practice with that. Now, obviously, that was something that was passed to address short-term conditions like weather days or flu days, where it's not uncommon in the state of Arkansas during flu season. Schools have to close for a couple of days until they can get the schools cleaned, get staffing back in place. But those were very short-term situations. In fact, our AMI law only allows up to 10 days of alternative methods of instruction. Because of the emergency, the governor gave agencies the authority to extend and waive some of the requirements, and that was one of the things that we were able to waive. So the AMI went from 10 days to the rest of the school year, ultimately. We had great partnerships, and teachers did a great job of shifting to online learning where that was a possibility. Some areas of our state, that was not a possibility, so they shifted to providing packets, where packets could be sent home with students, and some type of learning was still taking place. We also saw school districts do a great job with providing food service. At one point last spring, 90% of Arkansas school districts had continued some type of food service operations. 90%. Extreme effort to make sure that happened, either through grab-and-go meals or meal delivery. That's compared to the rest of the nation that at that same time, about 40% of the districts in the rest of the nation were providing that. Arkansas works together to meet the needs of our students. We saw that in the spring. So again, bragging on the teachers, bragging on the school leaders for making that happen. But then the question became, what happens in August, September, October, November, December, you've heard, you may believe, there may be some that think, look, we should just wait and go this first 9 weeks with online learning. Or maybe some think that we need to go to December. There's been some that would say, well, we need to wait until there's a vaccine. Well, the unknowns of all of those things create continued hardships on our students. And the longer some of these students are not physically in a classroom, the more challenges there will be to getting those students the education that they need. So we made clear our expectation was for on-site instruction. Now, that did not mean that we were expecting every school to bring back 100% full capacity of their student body. We made options available where schools could offer virtual learning for those parents that felt like that's something that worked for them. And we've seen that. We have seen anywhere from 10 to 50% in some districts of our students that have opted for virtual learning. That means that there are districts that have from 50% to 90% of their students that are coming on site. We gave districts options. We gave them options to say, look, you can do alternative scheduling if that's something that works for you, works for your, for the people in your district, the families and the students. But you have to have some level of on-site with precautions so that it can be done safely. And so this table shows a few examples of what we said. Yes, you can do A/B scheduling if that's something that works for you. But for those families for whom that does not work, you need to make sure on-site instruction is still available. Some would say, well, in the spring, you were closing and our case number was much lower then than it is now. And that is a valid question. So what is different? Why are you insisting on having on-site instruction? I would say we've learned a lot more. In the spring, we didn't understand. You remember in the spring, one day the CDC said, you need to wear a mask. And the next week they would come out and say, well, maybe masks aren't that helpful. Other experts were out there. There was not a consensus of some of the, from the experts in our nation of what these precautions meant to coming back to safe, not just school, but any other options that were out there, either through businesses, through church services. I mean, we've seen a lot of studies over the last several months. And now what we know is there has been some resolution of some of these questions. The masks, our experts say, yes, that does have an impact. You've seen it here. We've seen it in places like the Fort Smith area where since the mask mandate, case numbers have started to come down. We've especially seen it in places like Fayetteville where they were on a very steep curve of increased infections. And since the mask mandate, they've come down. So there are a number of things that are different now. We also know PPE, what is necessary, not just masks, but with the equipment that we have, that it's needed, the sanitation processes, the emphasis on hand washing, those are all very important parts of what we need to put in place. Schools can now use their data that they have acquired by surveying their parents to say, okay, now I know about how many students I have coming on site. We can make adjustments to our classrooms. We can make adjustments to our cafeteria schedules. We can make adjustments to our bell schedules. All these things help us create safer conditions to come on site. We also know that the interrupted learning of the spring is going to create conditions that students need help. Teachers will need help coming back and making up for that lost time, making up for that interrupted learning where maybe AMI was not as effective as it needed to be for some students. Back in the spring, before the previous school year ended, we started bringing teachers on board to say, you know what the essential standards are for a third grade teacher. We need you, this cohort of third grade teachers, to help create lessons, to identify and help other teachers around the state know how to cover those essential standards that may have been missed. So now we released, the first thing we released is the playbook. We call it the Back to School Playbook. And again, developed by teachers for teachers. And I mentioned the professional learning communities earlier and the pilot program we had. We tapped the knowledge and the resources of those teachers that have been involved in the professional learning communities process so that they could help us create this tool for teachers to be used all over the state. We also set up clear processes for communication. Every school district has a point of contact, and this point of contact works directly with the health department that if a case is identified on a school campus or in a school community, that either be a student or a faculty member or a staff member, then that point of contact quickly identifies who could the possible close contacts be. They are not contact tracers. Your points of contact in the schools are not contact tracers, but they help provide the initial information so that the health department can pursue the contact tracing. And then establishing what happens, what is the response in the school? If we do have cases, it's very likely we will. If we do have cases, what does that mean to the operations of our school? Well, in some cases it's limited because you already have a number of students that are not on site. You already have social distancing in place. Maybe you can carry on in what we call a limited response in the green zone. If it becomes greater in number or starts affecting and impacting the availability of staff, for instance, if you have, and we've seen this, that a school may have a close contact or number of close contacts from a positive case that impacts a significant number of teachers, then the limited response may be, look, this school might have to go to virtual learning for a period of time until the quarantine period is over. That would be an option. Again, it's not what we did in the spring, because in the spring we said we're closing everything for on-site instruction. We know more now and we know how to deal with and isolate some of these conditions. And then if it gets to that point where a critical response is necessary, that may mean most of your students do shift to online learning or virtual learning. But it also means that you can still have on-site operations in those smaller numbers of people. You may need to go back to the limitations. If you remember when we limited to 10 people or less in a setting, that may be something you have to implement in your classrooms. Why is this important? There are always going to be students that need instruction, interventions, therapies that they're only going to get effectively if they are on the campus of the school. It was very difficult to provide some of those things when you are 100% virtual learning. We want to give schools the opportunity to continue a level of on-site instruction and on-site services that may be limited and much more restrictive, but we don't want to get to that point that we were in the spring where we said we are closing schools for on-site instruction. Is that still an option? It is. If it becomes necessary, if it becomes severe enough, that is an option. And schools will be able to call the department, and we will work with the Department of Health to help make decisions. And again, I talked a little bit about the limited response, the moderate response, the critical response. At each of these levels, there are very specific things that you can look to. Give you an example. Many schools in the state of Arkansas would begin Monday morning with a school assembly. Bring every student into the cafetorium, auditorium, whatever facility they had, and it would be a way that they would get the school day or the school week started off very positively. We can't do that this year. There are things that must change. We must change those practices, and we're simply asking schools to think about what are those practices as they have been preparing for starting school next week. I think it's also important that we did delay the start of school by almost 2 weeks. That was important because we know there are a number of districts around the state that really didn't get engaged in their planning process till July. And if you think about the level of adjustments that needed to be made, we simply would not have been ready in many of our districts if we had started on August 13th as the original plan had set forth. So the governor making that delay was a good call. It was very helpful. And I think that's going to create a situation where most of our districts, if not all of our districts, will feel better about their plans going into next week. We also did a lot of work to help districts prepare for blended learning. We learned a lot during the spring about what was available and what was not available in our communities. One of the things that I think the governor should be committed to is a commitment of his GEAR funding, Governor's Education Emergency Relief Funds that came from the CARES Act to purchase Wi-Fi hotspots. For every district in the state got an allocation of Wi-Fi hotspots due to the help and partnership of T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T. Every district in the state has access to that. Not only that, but some of those providers also said, we will extend the state pricing to local school districts if they wanted to purchase additional hotspots. That was huge because that took a very expensive proposition for many of our school districts down to something that was much more affordable. And they had federal funds that they could use also through the CARES Act to take advantage of that. We created resources for parents through call centers. We have a call center that's primarily for school districts, but we also have a call center for parents, grandparents, caregivers, if they have questions about about school, about how we're coping with COVID-19, that they can access that Monday through Friday from 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock. And it's a partnership through the Children's Hospital, UAMS, and also we have bilingual resources for those that need that information in a language other than English. We've produced, also in partnership with Children's Hospital and UAMS, a Healthy School Guide in parent-friendly language to help our parents and our teachers have conversations with their students about what are the best practices. Now, there are some things in this document that it will be implemented to varying degrees around the state. While this is best practice, these are not policy guides. These are not policy requirements. But we wanted the parents to understand you have someone that's a highly respected partner, highly respected across the state, like Children's Hospital and UAMS, helping create these resources. And my wife and I had a conversation a few weeks ago. She said, are you putting out anything to the parents? And I said, well, yeah, we're putting out stuff all the time. And I showed her on our ADE website all the things that we had put out. And she read them and she said, well, I'm sure this is great, but I don't understand any of this. Parents can't understand this, what you're saying here. This is all technical language, education language. You need something that parents can understand. And gentlemen, as you can attest, probably how many times you said my wife was right. My wife was right. And so when I got the draft for this, I gave it to her and I said, hey, would you read this and see what you think about this? And she just, oh, this is great. Oh my goodness, this is great. Every page she looked at, she said, oh my goodness, this is great. Why haven't you put anything out like this? And I said, well, this is us. But we got help from people who do know how to put those things in parent-friendly, mom-friendly, dad-friendly language so that all across Arkansas, our parents and caregivers can know what to expect. We also know that students have been impacted from a mental health perspective. You think about it. I mentioned it before. Child's accustomed to getting on that school bus every day, going to school, seeing their friends, seeing their teachers, engaging in those relationships. And you go from that one day to the next day, you can't go to school. The impact that has had on students across the state has been tremendous. And so we know that there will be help needed to help our students cope with some of these challenges that have been created by the COVID-19 and the necessary responses. Again, UAMS Children's Hospital has been a great partner in putting this out. Going back to the plan, do, check. We know that next week when school starts, all the schools in Fort Smith, River Valley area, all this area are all over the state. They have plans going in, and we know that it's pretty typical on day one of a normal school year, you see a plan that doesn't go the way you think it's going to. This year, that will be on steroids. We expect that. We don't want school districts to fear getting in trouble because something doesn't go right. We fully expect and are asking districts to be open to changing their plans based on what they see as they start things next week, based on the community, the impact of COVID on the community. They need to be able to respond. We need to give them that support. But that's where the plan, do, check. That plan is not a static plan. The plan for next week must not be static. It must be adaptable. We must be nimble in making the adjustments so we can have a successful school year. And ending with this question, as a community, as a chamber group, as a group that fully supports education in the Fort Smith area, what is your vision for 2021? We can adopt a very pessimistic vision of 2021. We can adopt a very negative vision of what that's going to look like. Just yesterday, a legislator asked me a question in legislative committee. She said, Commissioner, or Mr. Secretary, said, I've got people who think that this 2 weeks is just, we're going to go back 2 weeks, get ready for online learning, and we're going to shut down just like we did in the spring. I said, no, ma'am, that is not the plan. I'm optimistic. I choose to be optimistic about the school year. Will we have challenges? Absolutely, we're going to have challenges. But I will say that with the planning and the community support, that districts will be able to overcome those challenges. We will have a successful school year. And we will look back on 2021 as a year where we overcame many challenges, learned about the human nature of Arkansans and our communities. And once again, we see that Arkansas is ready for the challenge and will step up and make things happen for our kids. So thank you again for helping me be a part of this today.
Thank you, Secretary Key. So we've got time for a few questions. So for those of you that are online, if you want to put your question in the chat box, we'll try to answer a few of those today. We'll start with one that has come in, and it has to do with resources. Obviously, we've seen across the state a number of teachers choose to move into retirement, possibly due to some personal situation or related to coronavirus. How do you feel about where we are related to teacher staffing across the state at this point in time?
That's a great question. You know, we over the last several years have been working very hard to rebuild the pipeline of teachers by creating not just that traditional pipeline of teachers going into a four-year college, four-year program, but also looking for those alternative ways and really elevating how we support teachers and support students who want to become teachers. This is going to be a challenge to that. It's going to, just like it's challenging everything else, we feel like we have a good infrastructure of support to minimize and mitigate the impact that COVID will have on that. We do know that it's accelerating some of those decisions. There's one school district I learned about just today, Springdale. They offered some of their teachers who might have high risk conditions. They said, look, we will give you opportunity for 1 year leave. And so that you don't necessarily have to retire, but take 1 year leave. And then next year, if you want to come back with your job, a job will be available for you in our district. That's pretty innovative. It is risky, but we're looking to help districts find ways to make those things available while we continue to build that pipeline. This past summer, we had our first cohort of students that got the certified teaching assistant. So it's a new program, and it's a great time for a new program because there are students out there that can get this 2-year opportunity, but then look to complete that 4-year degree and then become fully licensed, fully certified teachers. So those are elements of preparation that we had that we didn't know we were going to need. We knew we needed them. We didn't know that we needed them for COVID. But we needed them anyway, and we're going to continue to build some of those programs.
Great, thank you. So the next question, you touched on to some degree during your comments. So it was very important, obviously, for our state and the governor for us to get students back into on-site instruction. but we know that at whatever point in time we return to normal, and I think we're all optimistic of that, whatever that new normal looks like, there could be some students that are on track, and there could be some that are behind. So have you given any thought, have we given any thought as a state to that point in time and what we could do or plan to do to get those students that may be slightly behind than where they should be at that point, caught up and back on par with their peers?
You know, that's a challenge in any normal school year. There are always students who, students do not learn at the same rate. There are students who, are going to be behind, and it's always a challenge to get them to where we want them to be. I would say one of those strategies is really what I mentioned in the professional learning communities. That process looks at student level data and creates the supports that they need to get them caught up while continuing to help the students advance. It's not an either or. All students can learn at high levels. That's the number one belief system we have to have, is that all students can learn at high levels. What does high levels mean? At or above school grade level for their appropriate grade level. The playbook was definitely part of that initial outreach. We're also asking districts, you may need to change some of your practices. You may need to change some of your policies. We have districts that have higher requirements for graduation than the state requirements. That's not a bad thing. But if it becomes an impediment for students being successful, that's something that local districts can look at and local boards can look at to say, is this something that is needed just because we want to be a little higher, or is this something that is creating a problem and a barrier for some of our students to actually succeed? So there are a number of things that we could look at there, but it is on our radar, and we're working with districts to make sure that they have the resources they need to catch these kids up.
Great, thank you. We've probably got time for one last question. So I think we all know that physical activity during the day, access to the outdoors, those kinds of things is very important for our students to the learning process. Obviously, there could be some restrictions to recess and availability to the outdoors, especially for some of our younger students. And this may be in the parent guide that you mentioned, but can you talk just a little bit about plans for outdoor activities, recess-related activities in the district?
Yeah. That's a great question, Jason, and that has been a question because the de-emphasis on recess over the last couple of decades, really, where you've seen less time available for recess because under No Child Left Behind, we don't have time for recess. We have to have them in the class, so we've got to get ready for that test. Well, what we know is that recess time is as important and more important to some students than just being in the class, hearing lessons, working on worksheets, doing drills. We need to make that available. Adjustments will have to be made. And that's where, instead of maybe a whole grade level going to recess at one time, those building schedules need to be adjusted so that you limit the number of students that are on that playground. You may have to limit the access to equipment because it's so difficult to clean outdoor equipment according to the guidelines that the health department has issued. But I've seen some very creative solutions to that. I saw a video from Nemo Vista, very small school district between here and Little Rock. And in their video, they describe their grids. And so a teacher will go out and their class will have recess within this grid. Now, obviously, it's going to be tough for kids to obey an imaginary line or even a white chalk line. But the point is that it gives students those boundaries that they say, you can play within this area and that's fine. But what that does is, if there is a positive case, it limits the exposure outside to those other students in that school. So there are some creative solutions. Recess is as important now as it ever was. We actually have a kids guide to the coronavirus that every elementary school student in the state is going to receive. And it talks about not just what the virus is, it talks about the other important aspects of health, such as proper diet, exercise, all those things as a way to make sure you are healthy so that you don't get sick and you don't make others sick. Great question.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
You know, we have a number of really good questions that have come into the chat box. Unfortunately, we don't have time to answer them all, but we will make sure that we get the many guides that you talked about that have come out from the agency out to our membership, because I suspect some of these questions that are being asked today will find some of those good answers.
Absolutely. And there are
in those
links to each one of those in the presentation. So I encourage you to click those links if you can get a copy of the presentation. They are downloadable, so they're PDF. You can print them at home or you can have them on a device, whatever's most convenient for you. But please share those, spread those around. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to be here with you.
Great.
All right.
Secretary Key, thank you. Secretary, we really appreciate you being with us today and appreciate all you and your team have done to help us get ready for Monday. I think like you, we're optimistic. I think we're ready, and it'll be a challenge, but I think we're ready for the challenge. So with that, we have one more speaker before we wrap up. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Doug Brubaker, Superintendent of Fort Smith Public Schools.
Just have a couple of quick comments. First, I'm joined today by our school board president, Bill Hainsworth, and Dalton Person, one of our directors. I'm honored to work with them. Just want to take a moment to thank Secretary Key and his leadership at the state level, or his team at the state level, for their leadership. You can tell by viewing the materials that they put together how much thought, how much energy, how much effort has gone into supporting us at the local level. Also want to thank the Chamber and our sponsors for serving breakfast to all of our teachers this year. This required a lot of additional arrangements, a lot of special logistics. It meant a lot. I was out at schools yesterday and I heard a lot about how much that meant to them. If there is anything that we've learned since March, it's that our situation is fluid. I am grateful to begin the school year on Monday with such great community support, a wonderful team of educators as we work together to meet the needs of students. If anyone's interested in learning about our preparations as a school district, I encourage you to go to www.fortsmithschools.org. There's a COVID section where you can learn about the things that we're doing there. So thank you so much, Secretary Key, for being here.
Brubaker. At this point, we'll turn it back over to Tim Allen.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Secretary Keith, thank you so much for coming over to Fort Smith. Very important topic for all of us. You guys have a huge task. We have a huge task in front of us, but we're up for the challenge. There's no doubt about that. I wanted to quickly mention, we're proud to announce the return of the Chamber's First Friday Breakfast series that everyone is so used to for many, many years. We've also had to adapt our situations as well. So the first Friday, however, because the Labor Day weekend coming up in September, mark your calendars for September the 11th, 7:30 a.m., back in the Reynolds Room at UAFS. And our first speaker is Dr. Teresa Riley. So we're so excited to hear from our chancellor. Watch your inboxes for all the information to sign up for the event. Limited seating, just like this today, limited seating at the university so we can social distance. But it will be simulcast to our membership. And so if you can't make it in person, please sign up to attend virtually. Thank you all for attending. Have a great weekend and see you next time. Thank you.